The Wisconsin forest canopy filtered the late afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns across Evan Crane's survey equipment. He adjusted his GPS unit and marked another waypoint on his tablet, frowning at the data displayed on the screen. This was the fourth quadrant he'd surveyed today, showing the same disturbing pattern of vegetation. Die-off. Sector 17B, northeastern quadrant. Evan muttered into his digital recorder. Continued evidence of unexplained vegetation necrosis extending approximately 40 meters in diameter from central point. Soil samples show no obvious contaminants. No signs of insect infestation, fungal disease, or parasitic growth visible on damaged specimens. He paused the recording and knelt to examine a blackened fern. The plant's fronds crumbled at his touch, disintegrating into a fine, sooty powder that clung to his fingertips. Evan rubbed the residue between his thumb and forefinger, noting its unusual texture, almost metallic, leaving a faint, silvery sheen on his skin. He pulled a sample bag from his vest pocket and carefully collected a portion of the decayed plant matter. This wasn't right. The Department of Natural Resources had sent him to survey potential sites for forest restoration, not investigate unexplained botanical deaths. But over the past 3 days, he documented increasingly large patches of dead vegetation throughout this remote section of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. The pattern defied conventional explanation. Plants didn't just die in perfect circles without cause. Evan stood, wincing at the stiffness in his knees. At 34, he wasn't old, but 10 years of field work had left its mark on his body. He took a long drink from his water bottle and checked the time. 5:47 p.m. The sun would set in less than an hour, and he was still 3 miles from his cabin. Just one more quadrant, he told himself. Then I'll head back. He adjusted his backpack and pushed deeper into the forest, following the spreading pattern of decay. The transition was stark. Lush, healthy woodland, giving way to increasingly sickly vegetation, before culminating in a zone of complete botanical death. The outer edge showed plants in various stages of decline, leaves wilting, stems blackening, roots shriveling in the soil. But at the center, Evan stopped abruptly, his breath catching in his throat. At the center of the dead zone stood something impossible. Rising from the forest floor was a metallic structure, roughly cylindrical and approximately 7 feet tall. Its surface had the dull sheen of brushed steel, unmarred by rust or corrosion despite the humid forest environment. No visible seams, joints, or opening mechanisms interrupted its seamless exterior. But most disturbing were the thin, vein-like tendrils extending from its base, penetrating the surrounding soil like roots. "What the hell?" Evan whispered, instinctively taking a step backward. This wasn't a man-made object that had been placed here. There were no track marks, no disturbed vegetation indicating it had been transported through the forest. The surrounding soil showed no signs of excavation. The structure appeared to have simply grown from the ground. Evan circled the object cautiously, maintaining a distance of several feet. As he moved, he noted how the patterns of decay radiated outward from the structure in concentric circles, the most severe degradation closest to the object. The air around it felt strangely charged, raising the fine hairs on his arms. He pulled out his camera and began documenting the find, taking photos from multiple angles, careful to include scale references. The forest had fallen unnaturally silent. No birdsong, no insect buzzing. Not even the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Just the soft whisper of the breeze through distant trees and the mechanical click of his camera shutter. Discovered unidentified structure at coordinates. Evan checked his GPS and recited the numbers into his recorder. Structure appears to be metallic in composition, cylindrical, approximately 7 feet in height and 3 feet in diameter. No visible access points or markings. Structure exhibits unusual integration with surrounding soil through root-like appendages. He paused, uncertain how to classify what he was seeing. This was beyond his expertise as a land surveyor. This was something for a specialized team, perhaps military or scientific researchers. Evan reached for his satellite phone to report the finding, then hesitated. The rational part of his brain, the part shaped by years of scientific training, urged caution. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. Before calling this in, he needed more data, more documentation. Moving closer, he crouched near one of the tendril-like projections extending from the base of the structure. It penetrated the soil at a shallow angle, its surface the same seamless metal as the main cylinder. Using a stick, Evan carefully scraped away some of the surrounding dirt, revealing more of the tendril. It narrowed as it extended outward, branching into smaller filaments that disappeared into the earth. The sight triggered a memory. The network of mycelium he'd once observed during a university field study. The way fungal threads spread beneath the forest floor, connecting trees in a vast, living network. But this was metal, not organic tissue. At least it appeared to be metal. On impulse, Evan reached out to touch one of the exposed tendrils, then pulled his hand back sharply before making contact. Something about the structure filled him with a visceral unease that overrode scientific curiosity. Instead, he took more photos, including close-ups of the tendril network. The light was fading quickly now, the forest darkening around him. Evan stood and activated his satellite phone, relieved when it displayed a signal. He dialed his department contact, watching the structure as the call connected. Northwood Station, this is Marcus. The voice on the other end was gruff, distorted by static. Miller, it's Evan Crane. I'm at the eastern boundary of Sector 17. I found something unusual. He struggled to find appropriate words. Some kind of metal structure that appears to be growing from the forest floor. A pause, then a bark of laughter. Growing. Metal doesn't grow, Crane. I know how it sounds. But this thing has what look like roots extending into the soil, and it's surrounded by a perfect circle of dead vegetation. The amusement faded from Miller's voice. Any markings on it could be some kind of weather station or research equipment. No markings, no access panels, no evidence it was transported here or installed. It's just there. Another pause, longer this time. You're in a pretty remote area. Could be some kind of illegal dumping. Maybe an old fuel tank someone abandoned. Evan sighed, frustration rising. It's not that. Look, I've documented everything. I can send you the coordinates and photos. Do that, Miller said, his tone now serious. I'll forward it to the regional office. They'll probably want to send a team to investigate. but it might take a few days to organize. In the meantime, mark the location and continue your survey. Keep your distance from the object until we know what we're dealing with." "Understood," Evan replied, though he felt a flash of irritation at being dismissed. He ended the call and began the process of sending the photo files, watching the slow progress bar as the large files uploaded through the satellite connection. While waiting, he took a final walk around the structure. The encroaching darkness had changed its appearance, shadows gathering around its base, making the tendrils seem to writhe and shift when viewed from the corner of his eye. But when Evan looked directly at them, they remained static, anchored in the earth. A sharp electronic beep informed him that the files had been successfully transmitted. Night was falling in earnest now, and Evan switched on his headlamp, the powerful beam cutting through the darkness. He needed to head back to his cabin before navigation became too difficult. Before leaving, he pulled a roll of bright orange survey tape from his pack and marked several trees surrounding the structure, creating a perimeter of warning flags. As he tied the last piece of tape, a strange sensation washed over him, a momentary dizziness accompanied by a high-pitched ringing in his ears. Evan stumbled, catching himself against a tree trunk. The sensation passed as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a dull pressure at the base of his skull. "Just fatigue," he told himself. "I've been out here too long today." With a final glance at the structure, now a dark silhouette in the gathering night, Evan turned and began the long trek back to his cabin, his headlamp beam bouncing through the forest ahead of him. The cabin was cold and dark when Evan arrived, his muscles aching from the day's exertion. He lit the propane lanterns and fired up the small generator outside, bringing the modest space to life. The DNR maintained a network of these simple accommodations throughout the National Forest for staff conducting extended field work. This one was more isolated than most, a deliberate choice on Evan's part when he'd requested the assignment. After his divorce from Laura, he'd needed space, silence, a project to lose himself in. The Forest Restoration Survey had seemed perfect. 3 months of solitary work in one of the most remote sections of the Chequamegon-Nicolet. No painful conversations, no well-meaning friends asking how he was holding up. No empty house filled with gaps where Laura's belongings had been. Just him, the trees, and the work. Evan hung his jacket on a hook by the door and placed his equipment on the small desk in the corner. The cabin consisted of a single room with a kitchenette along one wall, a desk, a narrow bed, and a wood-burning stove for heat. A small bathroom with a shower stall occupied a separate addition at the rear. The furnishings were utilitarian, designed for function rather than comfort, which suited Evan perfectly. He fired up the stove and heated a can of beef stew for dinner, eating directly from the pot while reviewing the day's data on his tablet. The vegetation die-off patterns were consistent across all surveyed quadrants, each centered around what appeared to be the early formation of structures similar to the one he'd documented. In most areas, only small metallic protrusions were visible, breaking through the soil like strange, inorganic shoots. But the one he'd found today was fully formed, mature, as if it had been growing there longer than the others. Evan opened a new document and began typing detailed notes, about his observations, organizing them with the same meticulous attention he brought to all his work. The process was soothing, transforming the unsettling discovery into data points, measurements, objective facts. This was how he'd always coped with life's complexities, by breaking them down into manageable components, categories, systems. It was how he'd tried to salvage his marriage, creating schedules for date nights, spreadsheets tracking fertility cycles, action plans for improving communication. As if love could be engineered with sufficient planning and documentation. Laura had called it his emotional spreadsheet approach to their relationship. Her voice tight with a frustration he hadn't fully understood until it was too late. Evan rubbed his eyes, pushing away the memory. He needed to focus on the work, not wallow in regrets. After finishing his notes, he uploaded them to the secure DNR server, along with the day's photos and survey data. The connection was sluggish, the progress bar advancing in tiny increments. While waiting, he pulled out his personal journal, a leather-bound notebook Laura had given him on their first anniversary. He'd kept it faithfully for years, recording thoughts he shared with no one else. "Found something today I can't explain," he wrote. Metal structure growing from the forest floor, like some kind of mechanical plant. Should feel excited by the discovery, but instead, there's this nagging dread. Something about it feels wrong on a fundamental level. The silence around it. The perfect circles of death radiating outward asterisk. He paused, tapping his pen against the page. Called it in, but I doubt anyone will take it seriously until they see it themselves. Can't blame them. If someone had described it to me, I'd have assumed they were exaggerating or confused. Tomorrow, I'll check the other quadrants. See if the structures I spotted in early formation have developed further. Need to establish a growth rate if that's indeed what's happening. Metal doesn't grow, but... A sharp pain lanced through Evan's head, interrupting his writing. He winced, pressing his fingers against his temples. The headache had appeared suddenly, intense and localized behind his eyes. After a moment, it subsided to a dull throb. Probably dehydrated, he thought, reaching for his water bottle. The data upload had completed while he was writing. Evan shut down his equipment and prepared for bed, the routine tasks anchoring him in normalcy after the strangeness of the day's discovery. He took a quick shower, the water pressure weak but the heat welcome on his tired muscles. As he was brushing his teeth, Evan caught his reflection in the small bathroom mirror. Hazel eyes shadowed with fatigue, 5-day stubble darkening his jaw, sandy brown hair tousled and too long. He looked older than his 34 years, the past 6 months having etched new lines around his eyes and mouth. Laura would hardly recognize him now. Back in the main room, Evan checked the locks on the cabin door and windows, a habit from childhood he'd never outgrown, before turning off the lanterns and climbing into bed. Outside, the forest was alive with night sounds. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of nocturnal creatures moving through the underbrush, the whisper of wind in the pines. The familiar symphony should have been comforting, but tonight it felt somehow hollow, as if the forest were holding its breath. Evan closed his eyes, exhaustion quickly pulling him toward sleep, despite his unease. Just before consciousness slipped away, a faint sound reached him. a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to vibrate through the wooden frame of the cabin. He strained to identify the source, but the sound was elusive, hovering at the edge of perception. Probably the generator, he decided, too tired to investigate further. Sleep claimed him at last, deep and dreamless at first. But sometime in the night, Evan's mind filled with vivid images, silver tendrils spreading beneath the forest floor, connecting the structures in a vast network. In the dream, he could see through the earth as if it were transparent, watching the metallic roots extend, branch, and interweave, forming a complex lattice that pulsed with strange energy. The network was growing, reaching toward his cabin with deliberate purpose. And somewhere, deep below, something was awakening. Evan jerked awake, heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat. The cabin was dark and quiet, the dream already fading from memory, leaving behind only a lingering sense of dread and a strange metallic taste in his mouth. He fumbled for his phone on the bedside table, checking the time. 3:27 a.m. As he lay back down, a warm trickle ran from his nose over his lip. Evan touched it with his fingers, then squinted at the dark smear in the dim light filtering through the window. Blood. He sat up, reaching for a tissue to stem the nosebleed. It wasn't heavy, just a slow trickle that stopped after a few minutes of pressure. Probably caused by the dry air in the cabin, he reasoned, though he'd never been prone to nosebleeds before. Evan lay awake for a long time after that, listening to the night sounds of the forest, unable to shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. That beneath the peaceful woodland he'd come to know over the past weeks, something ancient and utterly alien was stirring. When sleep finally reclaimed him, his dreams were filled with metallic structures rising from the earth like strange mechanical mushrooms after rain, and in each dream they grew larger, more numerous, spreading across the forest floor in perfect concentric circles. Circles of death, widening with each passing hour. Evan woke to the insistent beeping of his alarm. His mouth felt dry, coated with a metallic taste that lingered despite rinsing with water. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, throwing geometric patterns across the worn wooden floor. He'd slept later than intended, the digital clock beside his bed showing 7:48 a.m. He sat up slowly, wincing at the dull throb behind his eyes, the shadow of yesterday's headache. As he swung his legs over the side of the bed, Evan noticed a rusty smear on his pillowcase, another nosebleed during the night. He touched his upper lip. The blood had dried, forming a flaky crust that crumbled under his fingertips. In the small bathroom, Evan examined his reflection. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a thin line of dried blood traced from his right nostril to the corner of his mouth. He leaned closer to the mirror, tilting his head to check his nasal passages. No obvious irritation or injury. Just another inexplicable symptom to add to the growing list. The night's dreams clung to him, fragments resurfacing as he showered and dressed. Metal roots spreading beneath the soil, structures rising like strange fungi after rain, a vast network pulsing with alien purpose. The images were vivid, almost like memories rather than dreams. Evan shook his head, trying to clear it. He needed to focus on today's work, 2 weeks into his assignment, he had a substantial area left to survey, and the discovery of the metallic structure had added urgency to the task. After a quick breakfast of instant coffee and an energy bar, Evan gathered his equipment. He checked his satellite phone. Still no response from the regional office regarding yesterday's report. Not surprising given the bureaucratic pace of the DNR, but frustrating nonetheless. The structures warranted immediate investigation, not the typical weeks-long approval process for deploying a specialized team. Outside, the morning was bright and cool, dew glistening on the grass surrounding the cabin. Birds called from the surrounding trees, their songs vibrant and clear. The forest appeared perfectly normal, a stark contrast to the zones of death he'd been documenting. Evan consulted his tablet, mapping the day's survey route. He'd continue the systematic grid pattern, but with additional attention to areas showing early signs of the anomalous growth. According to his data, at least 3 more quadrants contained metallic protrusions in nascent stages of development. The first quadrant on his route was a mile northwest of the cabin. Evan walked briskly, the familiar weight of his backpack settling comfortably across his shoulders. The forest was active around him, squirrels darting between branches, woodpeckers hammering at distant trees, the occasional flash of deer moving through the understory. Life continuing its ancient cycles, oblivious to the aberration growing in their midst. As he approached the coordinates of the first site, the subtle shift in the environment became apparent. Bird songs faded. The rustling of small animals ceased. A heavy stillness descended, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Evan slowed his pace, alert to the changing atmosphere. The vegetation around him showed early signs of stress. Leaves drooping, colors dulling, stems beginning to blacken at their bases. The pattern was familiar now. Concentric circles of decay radiating outward from a central point. At the center of the affected area, a metallic protrusion broke through the forest floor. 2 weeks ago, it had been barely visible. A small, silvery bump, no larger than a golf ball. Now it rose nearly 3 feet from the ground, its cylindrical form identical to the mature structure Evan had documented yesterday. Growth rate exceeding initial estimates, Evan muttered into his recorder, circling the structure carefully. Structure has increased in size approximately 700% over 14 days. He took measurements and photographs, noting the accelerated pattern of vegetation death surrounding the growing structure. The tendrils at its base were more pronounced now, thicker and extending farther into the surrounding soil. One had broken the surface nearly a foot from the main cylinder, arching like a metallic serpent before plunging back into the earth. Evan felt the familiar pressure building at the base of his skull as he worked, a persistent discomfort that intensified the longer he remained near the structure. He'd come to recognize it as a warning sign, his body's primal response to something fundamentally wrong. Moving to a safe distance, he updated his survey data and marked the location on his GPS. The growth rate was alarming. If the other nascent structures were developing at a similar pace, the forest would soon be dotted with dozens of the strange metallic cylinders. The second site on his route showed an even more dramatic transformation. What had been a small protrusion a week ago now stood nearly 5 feet tall, its surface showing the first signs of the seam Evan had observed on the mature structure. The surrounding vegetation was completely dead, blackened husks crumbling at the slightest touch. But it was the third sight that truly shook Evan's scientific detachment. As he approached the coordinates, the stillness of the air felt different, charged, almost electric. The hair on his arms stood on end, and the pressure in his skull intensified to a painful throb. He swallowed against a wave of nausea, forcing himself to continue forward. The structure at this site was fully formed, identical to the first one he'd discovered. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it in a perfect circle were 6 smaller cylinders, each at different stages of development. They appeared to be growing in sequence, like the fruiting bodies of a vast underground organism erupting through the soil, one after another. Multiple structures at Site C, Evan recorded, his voice tight with tension. 7 total, arranged in a circular pattern, approximately 15 meters in diameter. Vegetation completely necrotic throughout the area. He approached the central structure cautiously, camera ready. As he drew closer, a soft vibration traveled through the soles of his boots, as if something beneath the forest floor were humming with power. The sound was just below the threshold of hearing, more felt than heard. A deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate with his own heartbeat. Evan raised his camera, focusing on the central cylinder. Through the viewfinder, he noticed something he'd missed with the naked eye. A faint luminescence emanating from the seam that encircled the structure. Not bright enough to be visible in daylight, but detectable through the camera's sensitive lens. A sharp pain lanced through Evan's head, momentarily blinding him. He staggered, the camera slipping from his fingers to dangle from its strap around his neck. The forest swam before his eyes, trees bending and distorting as if viewed through rippling water. For one terrifying moment, Evan thought he saw the ground between the structures shift, the layer of dead vegetation parting to reveal a lattice of silvery filaments pulsing beneath the surface. Then his vision cleared, the world snapping back into focus with disorienting suddenness. Heart pounding, Evan backed away from the circle of structures. Blood trickled from his nose again, warm droplets spattering the front of his shirt. He fumbled for a tissue, pressing it against his nostrils as he retreated to what he hoped was a safe distance. Once the bleeding stopped, Evan checked his watch. He'd lost track of time near the structures. What had felt like minutes appeared to have been over an hour. The sun had moved significantly across the sky, now directly overhead. He should continue his survey, document the remaining sites on today's route. But the headache was intensifying, making it difficult to concentrate, and the episodes of bleeding and disorientation were becoming more frequent, more severe. I need to get checked out, Evan thought, reaching for his satellite phone. The screen remained dark when he pressed the power button. Dead battery. Impossible. He'd charged it fully last night. He tried again, holding the button down longer. Nothing. Pulling out his regular cell phone, Evan found no service bars, expected in this remote area, but he checked routinely out of habit. His GPS unit still functioned, at least. He could navigate back to the cabin, use the radio there to contact the station. Decision made, Evan plotted the most direct route to the cabin. According to the GPS, He was approximately 4 miles northeast of his temporary home. A straightforward hike under normal circumstances, but his deteriorating condition complicated matters. He set off, moving more slowly than usual, mindful of his lightheadedness. The forest seemed to close in around him, shadows deepening despite the midday sun. Several times, Evan found himself veering off course, the GPS indicating he'd wandered from the plotted route without realizing it. After what should have been an hour's walk, Evan checked the GPS again and froze. According to the device, he'd been walking in a wide circle, gradually spiraling back toward the cluster of structures he'd been attempting to leave behind. "That's not possible," he muttered, staring at the screen. He'd been following the directional arrow precisely, keeping the cabin's coordinates as his destination. Evan reoriented himself, double-checking the compass function on the GPS. He set off again, focusing intently on maintaining a straight path southwest toward the cabin. The headache had intensified to a persistent, pounding agony, making it difficult to think clearly. 20 minutes later, he emerged from a dense stand of pines and found himself facing the circle of metallic structures once more. The central cylinder gleamed in the afternoon light, its surface reflecting the sun in dull, muted patterns. "No," Evan whispered, panic rising in his chest. "This isn't right." He checked the GPS again. The screen flickered, the map image distorting briefly before stabilizing. The directional arrow spun wildly, then settled, pointing directly toward the structures. Something was interfering with the device's functionality. Electromagnetic interference. Some kind of localized magnetic anomaly. Evan switched the GPS off, then back on, hoping a restart would reset the system. The screen remained black for several seconds before lighting up with the manufacturer's logo. When the map reappeared, the directional arrow pointed southwest again, away from the structures, toward the cabin. Evan pocketed the unreliable device and pulled out his compass instead. The needle swung erratically, unable to find magnetic north. He shoved it back into his pocket with a curse. He'd have to navigate by the sun and his knowledge of the terrain. After years of fieldwork, Evan was confident in his ability to find his way through wilderness without electronic aids. The cabin lay southwest of his current position. The sun was now in the western sky, beginning its afternoon descent. If he kept the sun on his right front quarter, he should move in approximately the correct direction. Setting off with renewed determination, Evan pushed through the underbrush, keeping careful track of his surroundings. He maintained a mental map of the terrain, noting distinctive trees, rock formations, and changes in elevation. His progress was slower, without the GPS guidance, but Evan felt certain he was moving away from the structures. The forest gradually returned to its normal state, birds calling overhead, small animals rustling through the undergrowth. The crushing pressure in his skull eased somewhat, though the headache persisted. After nearly 2 hours of careful navigation, Evan stopped to rest beside a small stream. He drank deeply, the cold water soothing his parched throat. The metallic taste that had lingered in his mouth all day finally began to fade. He splashed water on his face, then checked his reflection in the calm pool of a small eddy. Blood had dried around his nostrils again, and his eyes were bloodshot, the whites webbed with red. Evan hadn't slept well in days, and the physical symptoms were taking their toll. As he knelt by the stream, movement in the water caught his attention. Something silvery flashed beneath the surface, too quick to identify. Evan leaned closer, scanning the stream bed. There, a thin metallic strand embedded in the sediment, running parallel to the current. He reached into the water, fingers closing around the object. It felt warm to the touch, despite the coolness of the stream. Pliable yet strong, like living tissue with a metallic outer layer. As Evan lifted it from the water, the strand seemed to pulse between his fingers. Revulsion washed over him. He dropped the object, scrambling backward up the bank. The strand wriggled briefly on the surface, then slipped back into the water, disappearing among the rocks. Heart hammering, Evan grabbed his pack and continued his journey, no longer concerned with rest. The sun was lowering toward the horizon now, casting long shadows through the trees. He needed to reach the cabin before nightfall. An hour later, the familiar clearing appeared ahead. Evan nearly sobbed with relief at the sight of the small wooden structure, smoke curling from its chimney into the evening air. Smoke? He hadn't left a fire burning. The stove had been cold when he departed that morning. Evan approached cautiously, scanning the area for signs of visitors. No vehicles were visible. No equipment beyond his own. Perhaps Miller had sent someone to check on him after receiving yesterday's report. But why wouldn't they have waited for his return? At the cabin door, Evan paused, listening. Silence from within. He turned the handle slowly, pushing the door open with deliberate care. The interior was exactly as he'd left it. Bed neatly made, dishes cleaned and stacked, research materials organized on the desk. The wood stove was cold, no sign that it had been used recently. Evan frowned, stepping back outside to check the chimney again. No smoke. Just the clear evening air above the metal pipe. I saw smoke, he thought, rubbing his eyes. I know I did. The headache throbbed behind his eyes, vision blurring momentarily. Evan stumbled inside, collapsing onto the bed. He needed rest, medication for the pain, time to process the day's discoveries. The satellite phone's charging base sat on the small table beside the bed. Evan plugged in the device, relieved when the charging indicator lit up. Whatever had caused it to malfunction in the field, the phone appeared to be working now. While waiting for it to power up, Evan retrieved his tablet and downloaded the day's photos and data. The images of the circle of structures were clear, their metallic surfaces gleaming in the sunlight. But there was something different about them on screen, an almost organic quality to their arrangement, like mushrooms in a fairy ring. Evan zoomed in on the central cylinder, examining the faint luminescence along its seam. The light appeared to pulse in the sequence of images, brightening and dimming in a regular pattern. Not a camera artifact, then, but an actual feature of the structure. The satellite phone beeped, indicating it had powered up and acquired a signal. Evan dialed Miller's direct line at the station, desperate to report his findings. Northwood Station, Marcus speaking. Miller, it's Crane. Evan's voice sounded rough, even to his own ears. The structures I reported yesterday. There are more of them. At least 7 in the northeast quadrant, arranged in a circle. They're growing, changing. A pause. Slow down, Crane. You sound like hell. I've been experiencing symptoms, headaches, nosebleeds, disorientation. Something about these structures affects electronic equipment too. My GPS malfunctioned, kept leading me back to them instead of away. Where are you now? Back at the cabin. I managed to navigate by landmarks. Miller's voice lowered, concern evident. Look, I forwarded your report and photos to the regional office. They're taking it seriously, assembling a team to investigate. Should be up there within 48 hours. That might be too late, Evan pressed. These things are changing rapidly, developing. And I think they're affecting me somehow, interfering with perception. Another pause, longer this time. When Miller spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. Tell me more about these effects. The headaches, the disorientation. Any unusual dreams? The question sent a chill through Evan. How could Miller know about the dreams? Some, he admitted cautiously, vivid ones. About what? Evan hesitated. Metal roots spreading underground, connecting the structures. Miller exhaled slowly, the sound whistling through the connection. Stay put, Crane. Don't go near those structures again. I'm coming out there tomorrow first thing. Should reach your cabin by midday. What's going on, Miller? Do you know something about these structures? Just suspicions. Nothing concrete. Miller's voice was tight. Get some rest. Document everything, but do it from the cabin. Don't venture out. Especially not after dark. The call ended before Evan could ask more questions. He stared at the phone, unease coiling in his stomach. Miller knew something, or at least suspected something, about the structures. The Ranger's reaction had been too specific. His questions too targeted for mere concern about a colleague's well-being. Evan set the phone aside and moved to the cabin's small kitchenette. His hands shook slightly as he heated water for instant noodles, his only appetite for something warm and simple. While waiting for the water to boil, he retrieved the first aid kit from the bathroom and swallowed 2 painkillers, hoping they would dull the persistent throb in his skull. After eating, Evan returned to his tablet, creating a new document to log his symptoms. The scientific part of his brain insisted on documenting everything, treating himself as a subject of study, time of onset, duration, and intensity of each headache, frequency and volume of nosebleeds, episodes of disorientation, visual disturbances, auditory anomalies. The pattern was clear and troubling. The symptoms intensified when he was near the structures and diminished with distance, but never disappeared entirely. And they were growing worse each day. On impulse, Evan opened his sleep tracking app. He'd been using it routinely since Laura had complained about his restless nights disrupting her sleep. The data from the past 2 weeks showed a disturbing trend. Increasingly fragmented sleep patterns, extended periods in deep sleep states that typically occupied only brief portions of the normal cycle, and unusual brainwave activities during REM periods. Last night's readout was particularly alarming. The app had recorded extended periods of delta wave patterns typically associated with the deepest levels of sleep, but they appeared at times when Evan had been experiencing his most vivid dreams. A contradiction that shouldn't be possible, according to standard sleep science. He stared at the graph, a cold certainty settling over him. Whatever was happening wasn't just physical. It was affecting his neural patterns, altering his brain's electrical activity during sleep. The headache surged suddenly, vision tunneling as pain lanced through his skull. Evan gasped, doubling over on the bed. Something warm trickled from his nose, spattering on the tablet screen. Blood. More than before, flowing freely from both nostrils. Evan stumbled to the bathroom, grabbing a towel and pressing it against his face. The bleeding was heavier than any previous episode, soaking through the cloth within minutes. He tilted his head back, pinching the bridge of his nose, fighting against the rising panic. Eventually the flow slowed, then stopped. Evan lowered the bloody towel, his reflection in the mirror shocking him. Face pale, eyes wide and bloodshot, chin and neck stained crimson. He looked like a man in the grip of a serious illness, or like a man being changed from the inside out. Cleaning himself up as best he could, Evan returned to the main room. Night had fallen while he dealt with the nosebleed, the forest outside the windows, now a wall of darkness. He drew the curtains and turned on every light in the cabin, the brightness providing small comfort against the growing sense of isolation. Despite his exhaustion, Evan feared sleep. What new dreams might come tonight? What further changes might occur in his brain as he slumbered? He sat at the desk instead, powering up his laptop to compose a comprehensive report of everything he'd observed. If Miller arrived tomorrow as promised, Evan wanted complete documentation ready, not just of the structures, but of their apparent effects on living organisms. As he typed, organizing his observations into categories and subcategories, Evan caught movement in his peripheral vision. Something slithering across the wooden floor, silvery and sinuous. He jerked his head toward it, but there was nothing there, just shadows cast by the lamp. Visual hallucinations. Now, he thought grimly, adding the observation to his symptom log. Hours passed as Evan worked, fighting against fatigue. Sometime after midnight, he found himself jerking awake, face pressed against the keyboard. Despite his resistance, sleep was claiming him. Too exhausted to fight it any longer, Evan moved to the bed, not bothering to undress beyond kicking off his boots. As consciousness began to fade, the familiar humming sound returned, a deep, rhythmic vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. No, not from the walls. From beneath the floor. From the earth itself. The sound followed Evan into sleep, becoming the pulse of his dreams. Once again, he saw the network of metallic roots spreading beneath the forest. More extensive now, connecting all the structures in a vast mycelial web. But tonight, something new appeared in the dream landscape. A central hub where the largest tendrils converged, pulsing with energy, processing information like some vast alien brain. And it was aware of him, aware of being observed. In the dream, Evan felt its attention shift, focusing on him with terrible intensity. Tendrils began growing toward him, reaching up through the soil beneath the cabin, seeking, sensing, finding. Evan woke with a strangled cry, sheets twisted around his body, drenched in sweat. The cabin was dark. The power had gone out while he slept. Outside, the first gray light of dawn seeped through the curtains. He fumbled for his phone, checking the time. 5:17 a.m. He'd slept longer than intended, the nightmare feeling like it had lasted for hours. As Evan sat up, something caught his eye. a dark stain on the sheet beside him. More blood from another nosebleed. He switched on his phone's flashlight, illuminating the stain. Not blood, soil, as if he'd been digging with his bare hands. Evan examined his fingernails. Dirt was packed beneath them, his palms stained with earth. He had no memory of going outside, no recollection of digging in the ground. Heart pounding, he moved to the cabin door. It was unlocked, slightly ajar. The wooden floor was marked with dirty footprints, his own, leading from the door to the bed. Evan stepped outside, following the trail of disturbed earth that led from the cabin into the surrounding forest. The path continued for nearly 100 yards before ending at a shallow pit dug into the forest floor. The excavation was crude, clearly done with bare hands rather than tools. At the bottom of the pit, partially uncovered, was a metallic tendril as thick as Evan's wrist, pulsing faintly in the dawn light. It extended from the direction of the nearest structure site, curving beneath the earth toward his cabin. Toward him. Evan backed away, ice forming in his veins. He had dug this pit while sleepwalking, guided by something that had reached into his dreams. Something that wanted to be found. Something that was spreading throughout the forest, creating connections, establishing a network, and Evan was becoming part of it, whether he wanted to or not. Evan stared at the metallic tendril pulsing in the shallow pit, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. In the growing light of dawn, the object seemed to shimmer with an inner luminescence, the surface rippling with subtle patterns that reminded him of flowing mercury. I dug this up in my sleep. The realization sent a wave of nausea through him. Whatever was happening in the forest wasn't just an external phenomenon anymore. It had breached his defenses, infiltrated his unconscious mind, compelled his body to action without his awareness. Evan backed away from the pit, wiping his soil-stained hands on his pants. The metallic taste had returned to his mouth, stronger now, like sucking on a copper penny. He spat on the ground, watching as the saliva gleamed oddly in the morning light. Miller was coming today. Evan clung to that thought as he returned to the cabin. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Help was on the way. Inside, he stripped the dirty sheets from the bed and stuffed them into a trash bag, along with the blood-soaked towel from last night's nosebleed. He showered, scrubbing the dirt from beneath his fingernails with almost manic intensity, as if he could somehow cleanse himself of the night's events. The water sluicing down the drain carried flecks of dirt and traces of dried blood, swirling together in pale crimson patterns before disappearing. Evan stood under the spray long after he was clean, letting the hot water hammer against his aching muscles, desperately seeking normalcy in the mundane ritual. When he finally emerged, the small bathroom mirror had fogged completely. Evan wiped a clear patch with his hand and leaned in to examine his reflection. The face that stared back was haggard, eyes sunken and rimmed with red, cheekbones more prominent than they had been just 2 weeks ago. He'd lost weight, his features taking on a gaunt, hollowed appearance. But it was his eyes that disturbed him most. The hazel irises had always shifted between green and brown, depending on the light, but now they seemed to contain flecks of silver, like metallic dust suspended in the colored tissue. A trick of the light, Evan told himself, leaning closer, just a reflection from the bathroom fixtures. He dressed quickly in clean clothes, trying to ignore the slight tremor in his hands. The generator had restarted itself when the daylight activated its solar sensor, restoring power to the cabin. Evan checked his devices. The satellite phone showed full charge, but no signal. The laptop powered up normally, and the tablet displayed yesterday's data without issue. He opened his sleep tracking app, curious whether it had recorded last night's activities. The graph showed normal sleep patterns until approximately 2:14 a.m., when there was an abrupt shift from deep sleep to an unusual brainwave pattern the app had categorized as undefined. This state had continued for nearly 40 minutes before the tracking had stopped completely, likely when he'd left the bed to sleepwalk into the forest. Undefined. The clinical term felt wholly inadequate to describe what had happened. Evan wasn't just sleeping. He was being directed, controlled. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager dinner. Evan forced himself to prepare a proper breakfast. Instant oatmeal with dried fruit, a protein bar, and strong coffee. He needed energy, clarity. When Miller arrived, he had to be coherent enough to explain what was happening. As he ate, Evan composed a detailed report on his laptop, compiling all the data he'd collected on the structures and his own symptoms. He included the GPS coordinates of each site, growth rate estimates, and detailed descriptions of the physical and perceptual anomalies he'd experienced. The process was therapeutic, transforming the terrifying unknown into quantifiable data points. When the report was complete, Evan saved it to a USB drive, which he placed in his pocket. Redundancy was crucial. If something happened to his equipment or the cabin, the information would still reach the authorities. The morning passed with excruciating slowness. Evan paced the small confines of the cabin, checking his watch repeatedly. Miller had said he would arrive by midday. It was nearly 11:30 a.m. now. To distract himself, Evan returned to the photos he'd taken of the original structure. Something had been bothering him about its appearance, a detail he couldn't quite place. He scrolled through the images, studying each carefully. There, in a close-up of the seam that encircled the cylinder, the line wasn't perfectly straight as he'd initially thought. It undulated subtly, more like the edge of a cap on certain mushroom species than a manufactured joint. And the texture of the surface, when viewed at high magnification, revealed a cellular pattern reminiscent of biological tissue rather than machined metal. Evan zoomed in further, enhancing the contrast to better see the details. The surface wasn't solid at all, but composed of millions of tiny, interlocking structures, like scales or cells arranged in a metallic matrix. Not metal, Evan murmured. Just looks like metal. The realization shifted his entire understanding of what he was dealing with. These weren't mechanical objects that resembled biological structures. They were biological structures that resembled mechanical objects. The distinction was crucial. He was so absorbed in this discovery that the sound of an engine outside startled him. Evan rushed to the window. A Forest Service truck was pulling into the clearing, the familiar green paint visible through the trees. Relief flooded through him. Miller had arrived. Evan grabbed the USB drive and his tablet, hurrying outside to meet the ranger. The truck stopped near the cabin, engine idling for a moment before cutting off. The driver's door opened, and Marcus Miller Milligan stepped out. Evan had met the ranger only briefly during his orientation at the station. Miller was a burly man in his late 30s, with a thick red beard and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. Burn scars covered the left side of his face and neck, a reminder of the forest fire that had claimed 2 of his colleagues 3 years ago. Crane. Miller nodded in greeting, his expression serious. "You look like hell." "Thanks for coming," Evan said, too relieved to be offended by the blunt assessment. "I've documented everything. The structures, their growth patterns, the effects I've been experiencing." Miller's eyes narrowed slightly. "Let's talk inside." They entered the cabin, Evan immediately moving to his laptop to show the ranger his findings. Miller remained near the door, scanning the interior with careful attention. "You've been experiencing headaches?" "Nosebleeds?" Miller asked, his voice carefully neutral. Evan nodded. "And more. Disorientation, visual disturbances, even sleepwalking. Last night I dug up one of the tendril structures in my sleep. It's extending toward the cabin, directly toward me." "Show me." Evan led Miller to the pit he'd excavated during his unconscious episode. The metallic tendril still pulsed in the shallow depression, its surface catching the midday sun in ripples of silvery light. Miller crouched beside the pit, studying the tendril without touching it. His expression was unreadable, but Evan noted the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful way he kept his distance. "How many of the full structures have you found?" Miller asked, still staring at the tendril. 7 confirmed, all in the northeast quadrant, arranged in a circle, but there are more developing throughout the survey area. Miller stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "And the mature ones? Any changes in their appearance? Seams opening, movement, anything like that?" The specificity of the question sent a chill through Evan. "The first one I found has a seam around its circumference. It wasn't there initially. It developed over time." "How do you know about these things, Miller?" The ranger's gaze shifted away. "There have been reports. Similar structures in other parts of the forest. Nothing confirmed until your photos." "Reports from who? When?" "That's not important right now." Miller turned back toward the cabin. "What matters is containing this, isolating the affected areas until we understand what we're dealing with." Evan followed, frustration building. Miller knew more than he was saying, but getting information from the taciturn ranger was like extracting water from stone. Back inside, Evan opened his laptop and showed Miller the close-up images of the structure's surface. "It's biological. The metallic appearance is some kind of adaptive camouflage or protective layer, but the underlying structure is organic, cellular." Miller studied the images, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You should pack your things," he said finally. "I'm pulling you out today. This area isn't safe." "I need to document the seam opening," Evan protested. "The first structure I found. The seam is developing, changing. I've set up remote cameras to monitor it. If it opens, we need that footage." "I'll handle the monitoring," Miller said firmly. "You need medical attention. Those symptoms you're experiencing, they'll get worse if you stay." Evan hesitated. torn between scientific curiosity and self-preservation. The sensible choice was clear. Leave with Miller. Seek treatment for his deteriorating condition. Let professionals with proper equipment take over the investigation. But something deeper than reason held him back. A compulsion to see this through, to witness whatever was emerging in the forest. He'd made the discovery. He deserved to document its development. I've set up a remote camera at the first site, Evans said, a compromise forming. Let me check the footage, collect the equipment, and then I'll go with you. 2 hours tops. Miller frowned, clearly unhappy with the suggestion. 1 hour, he countered. And I'm coming with you. We stay together, maintain radio contact, and at the first sign of trouble, we're out. Agreed? Evan nodded, relief mixing with a strange disappointment. Part of him, a part he didn't fully recognize or understand, had been hoping Miller would leave without him. They gathered equipment quickly. Evan's camera and tablet, Miller's service radio and sidearm. The ranger raised eyebrows at the gun, but Miller shrugged it off. Standard protocol when investigating unknown phenomena, he explained, checking the magazine before holstering the weapon. Evan led the way through the forest, following the coordinates on his GPS. The device was functioning normally now. No sign of the strange malfunction that had led him in circles yesterday. Miller followed a few paces behind, his footsteps nearly silent despite his size. The practiced movement of a man accustomed to traversing wilderness. As they approached the site of the first structure, the familiar symptoms returned. Pressure building at the base of Evan's skull, a metallic taste flooding his mouth. He slowed, swallowing against the rising nausea. You feel it, Miller observed. Not a question, but a statement. Evan nodded. Gets worse the closer we get. Some kind of field effect. Electromagnetic, maybe. Or something we don't have a name for yet. They continued forward, the forest growing increasingly silent around them. The zone of dead vegetation was larger now, extending nearly 50 meters in all directions from the central structure. Nothing moved in the stillness. No birds, no insects. Not even the whisper of wind through branches. The structure stood as Evan had last seen it. A metallic cylinder rising from the earth, root-like tendrils extending from its base into the surrounding soil. But the seam he'd observed earlier had changed, widening slightly to reveal a dark line encircling the cylinder's circumference. It's opening, Evan breathed, excitement momentarily overriding his discomfort. He moved toward the remote camera he'd set up, checking that it was still recording. The battery indicator showed nearly full charge, enough to capture several more days of footage. Miller remained a few paces back, scanning the surrounding area with wary attention. Get what you need and let's go, he said tersely. This place isn't right. Evan downloaded the footage captured so far to his tablet, fingers moving quickly across the screen. I want to check something first, he said, opening the video player. The time-lapse footage showed the structure over the past 24 hours, compressed into a 2-minute sequence. For most of the video, nothing changed. Just the play of light and shadow across the metallic surface as the sun moved overhead. But at precisely 3:27 a.m., a subtle shift occurred. The seam widened fractionally, a soft luminescence emanating from the dark line. There, Evan pointed, pausing the playback. Same time I woke up last night from the dream. Miller moved closer, studying the footage. What kind of dream? Underground network, metallic roots connecting all the structures. Evan hesitated, then added, "It was watching me." Aware of being observed. A shadow passed over Miller's face. "We need to leave. Now." "I want to set up better monitoring equipment," Evan argued. "If it's going to open fully, we need to document it. This could be first contact with a non-terrestrial life form, or the re-emergence of something that was here long before us," Miller muttered, almost to himself. Before Evan could question this cryptic statement, a sharp pain lanced through his head, vision blurring momentarily. He staggered, tablet slipping from his grasp. Miller caught his arm, steadying him. "That's it. We're leaving." The ranger's tone brooked no argument. He retrieved the fallen tablet and handed it back to Evan, already turning to go. "Wait," Evan said, the pain receding to a dull throb. "I need to reset the camera angle. If the structure opens, the current position won't capture the interior." Miller hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Make it quick." Evan approached the camera tripod, adjusting its position to better frame the structure. As he worked, the pressure in his skull intensified, the world around him taking on a strange, dreamlike quality. The air felt thick, resistant, as if he were moving through water rather than atmosphere. The metallic taste in his mouth grew stronger, accompanied by a rhythmic humming that seemed to vibrate through his bones. Not sound exactly, more like a frequency tuned precisely to his nervous system, bypassing his ears to register directly in his brain. Evan found himself moving closer to the structure, camera forgotten. The seam beckoned, its faint luminescence pulsing in time with the humming resonating through his body. He needed to see inside to understand what was emerging. "Crane." Miller's voice seemed distant, muffled. "Step back from there." Evan barely registered the warning. He was mere feet from the structure now, close enough to see minute details in its surface. The cellular pattern more pronounced, individual units shifting and realigning like the scales of a living organism. The seam had widened further, the dark line now a distinct gap running around the cylinder's circumference. From within, a silvery substance was beginning to emerge, not liquid exactly, but flowing, composed of millions of tiny components moving in perfect coordination. "Beautiful," Evan whispered, reaching toward it. A hand clamped onto his shoulder, yanking him backward with enough force to make him stumble. Miller's face appeared before him, features tight with alarm. "Don't touch it," the ranger growled. "Don't even get close. It's influencing you." The spell broken, Evan blinked in confusion. He had no memory of approaching the structure, no recollection of the moments between adjusting the camera and standing directly before the opening seam. "I didn't mean to," he began, but Miller was already pulling him away, grip like iron on Evan's arm. "It's happening again," the ranger muttered, "just like before." "What's happening?" "What do you mean before?" Miller didn't answer, focused on putting distance between them and the structure. They'd nearly reached the edge of the dead zone when Evan stopped abruptly, digging in his heels. "No," he said, a strange certainty filling him. I need to document this. It's opening now. We can't leave. The compulsion to return was overwhelming, a physical pull that made his muscles ache with the effort of resistance. Something inside that structure was calling to him, a siren song that bypassed reason and spoke directly to his deepest instincts. Miller's expression hardened. That's not you talking, Crane. It's influencing your thoughts. You don't understand, Evan insisted, voice rising. This is the discovery of a lifetime. We can't just walk away. Listen to yourself. Miller snapped. 2 minutes ago, you were ready to leave. Now you're willing to risk your life to stay. That's not scientific curiosity. It's manipulation. The ranger's words penetrated the fog of compulsion, clouding Evan's mind. He was right. This overwhelming need to return to the structure wasn't natural. It wasn't him. Evan closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, trying to separate his authentic thoughts from the alien impulses flooding his consciousness. When he opened them again, the compulsion had receded slightly, still present but manageable. Okay, he said shakily. Let's go. They moved quickly through the forest, Evan fighting the constant urge to turn back with each step. The pressure in his skull had intensified to an almost unbearable level, vision blurring at the edges. How do you know so much about these things? Evan asked as they walked, partly to distract himself from the pain, partly because he needed answers. You weren't surprised by anything I showed you. You knew about the seam, the influence it exerts. Miller was silent for several paces, clearly weighing how much to reveal. 3 years ago, he finally said, during the big northern forest fire, we found something similar in a remote valley, structure just like the ones you've documented. My team was dispatched to investigate. What happened? The ranger's face darkened. Official report says 3 rangers died fighting the fire when the wind changed unexpectedly. Truth is, only 1 died in the fire. The other 2 changed, became something else. They approached the structure after it opened, made contact with what emerged. Evan felt cold despite the warm afternoon. What emerged? Something that looked like flowing metal, but moved with purpose. It touched them, and within hours, they weren't themselves anymore. Talked differently, acted differently, had these strange patterns under their skin, like circuits. Miller's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. We tried to get them medical help, but on the way out, they attacked us. Tried to bring us back to the structure. That's when the fire overtook our position. You survived. Miller nodded grimly, burns on my left side. Richardson died in the flames. The other 2, Martinez and Cooper, they just walked into the fire. Didn't scream, didn't try to escape. Just walked in like they were entering a doorway. The implications were chilling. Why wasn't this investigated? Reported? It was. The official investigation ruled it a tragedy caused by changing fire conditions. When I tried to tell them about the structure, the strange behavior, they attributed it to trauma, smoke inhalation, grief. The fire consumed everything. No evidence remained. But you knew I wasn't crazy when I reported finding the structures. I knew exactly what you'd found. Miller's pace quickened. And I know we need to get you out of here before it's too late. They walked in silence after that, Evan processing the ranger's revelation. If Miller was right, the structures weren't just strange biological anomalies. They were potentially lethal. The compulsion Evan had felt to approach the opening seam could have been the first step toward a transformation like the one Miller had described. As they neared the cabin, Evan realized the pressure in his skull had diminished significantly. Distance from the structure seemed to weaken its influence, though the metallic taste lingered in his mouth, a constant reminder of the connection that had formed. "Pack only what you need," Miller instructed as they entered the clearing. "We leave in 10 minutes. Evan nodded, heading into the cabin while Miller remained outside, speaking quietly into his radio. The transmission was garbled, signal breaking up despite the clear afternoon sky. Inside, Evan gathered his essential equipment: laptop, tablet, camera, notebooks, and portable hard drive containing all his research data. He changed into fresh clothes, movements mechanical, mind still processing everything Miller had revealed. Something about the Ranger's story nagged at him. Details that didn't quite align with what Evan had experienced. Miller had described the transformed Rangers as talking differently, acting differently. But Evan's symptoms were primarily physical and perceptual. Headaches, nosebleeds, altered sensory input. His personality, his sense of self, remained intact. Or did it? The compulsion he'd felt at the structure site had been overwhelming, foreign to his normal thought patterns. And the sleepwalking episode, digging up the tendril in his sleep, was that still him? Or something else already taking control? Evan zipped his backpack closed, ready to leave. But as he turned toward the door, his gaze fell on the laptop screen, still displaying the footage from the remote camera. The time lapse had continued playing while they were gone, showing the structure's development over the past hour. The seam had opened further, the gap now wide enough to reveal on what lay within. A churning mass of silvery material that seemed to flow and pulse with its own internal rhythm. As Evan watched, transfixed, the substance began to emerge from the opening, extending outward in sinuous tendrils that moved with deliberate purpose. Checking the timestamp, Evan realized the footage was from less than 30 minutes ago. The structure was opening now, at this moment, revealing whatever intelligence resided within. And he wasn't there to witness it. The compulsion returned with crushing force, an overwhelming need to return to the site. Evan gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white as he fought against the alien desire flooding his system. "This isn't me," he thought desperately. "This isn't my thought." But the distinction was becoming harder to maintain. The compulsion felt increasingly natural, integrated with his own curiosity and ambition. After all, wasn't this what any scientist would want? To witness the culmination of a groundbreaking discovery. Evan found himself calculating the distance back to the structure, estimating how quickly he could return. If he left now, told Miller he forgot something important. "Ready?" Miller's voice from the doorway shattered the spiral of compulsive thoughts. Evan blinked, the fog receding slightly. "Yeah," he managed, shouldering his backpack. "Ready." As they walked toward the Ranger's truck, Evan felt his resolve strengthening with each step away from the forest. The compulsion was still there, a persistent itch at the back of his mind, but manageable now, recognizable as an external influence rather than his own desire. Miller stowed Evan's gear in the truck bed, securing it with bungee cords. "We'll head straight to the regional medical center in Rhinelander," he said. "They've been briefed to expect us." Evan nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. As Miller started the engine, a sharp pain lanced through Evan's head, momentarily blinding him. He gasped, pressing his palms against his temples. "Crane, you all right?" Miller's voice seemed distant, distorted. The pain receded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a strange clarity. Evan straightened, lowering his hands. "I'm fine," he said, the words feeling oddly disconnected from his consciousness, as if someone else were speaking through his mouth. Miller studied him for a moment, then put the truck in gear. They pulled away from the cabin, following the narrow access road that would eventually connect with the main Forest Service route. As they drove, Evan found himself staring back at the diminishing view of the cabin, a sense of loss building in his chest. Not just for the research opportunity he was abandoning, but for something deeper, more primal, a connection severed before it could fully form. The rational part of his mind knew leaving was the right decision. The structures were dangerous, their influence on him growing stronger each day. He needed medical attention, and the phenomenon needed to be investigated by professionals with proper containment protocols. But beneath that rational understanding, a new awareness was taking root, a sense that he was not merely leaving something behind, but being torn away from a part of himself, something that had begun to grow within him, reshaping his perception, his understanding, his very biology. Something that wasn't finished with him yet. The truck hit a pothole, jolting Evan from his thoughts. Miller was saying something about the route ahead, estimated arrival time in Rhinelander, medical procedures to expect. The words washed over Evan without registering, his attention drawn instead to the subtle sensation spreading through his body, a warmth radiating outward from his core, followed by a tingling along his nerve pathways. He glanced down at his hands resting on his thighs. In the shadows of the truck cab, he could almost imagine a silvery pattern beneath the skin of his wrists, tracing the paths of veins and arteries. Almost, but not quite. Not yet. Evan closed his eyes, feigning fatigue. But behind his eyelids, he saw the seam opening wider, the silvery substance emerging in flowing tendrils. And he knew, with inexplicable certainty, that it would wait for him, that somehow, eventually, he would return to it. Not as Evan Crane, but as something new. The Regional Medical Center in Rhinelander was a squatty utilitarian building that smelled of antiseptic and despair. Evan sat on the edge of an examination table, the paper covering crinkling beneath him, as a doctor examined the injection site on his forearm, where the tendril had nearly touched him. "And you first noticed this when?" Dr. Weiss asked, peering through a magnifying glass at the small patch of discolored skin. "3 days ago," Evan replied, watching the doctor's face for reactions. "It's been spreading." The patch had grown since he'd first discovered it, the silvery discoloration now covering an area the size of a $50. Beneath the skin surface, fine lines extended outward, like metallic capillaries, creating a pattern reminiscent of circuit boards or mycelial networks. "Any pain? Itching? Numbness?" Dr. Weiss prodded the area with a gloved finger. "No pain. Sometimes it pulses, in rhythm with my heartbeat. The doctor made a non-committal sound, turning to make notes on a tablet. Evan had been at the medical center for 6 hours now, subjected to a battery of tests: blood work, MRI, CT scan, neurological evaluation. Miller had departed after delivering him, promising to return once he'd reported to his superiors. "Your preliminary results are concerning, Mr. Crane," Dr. Weiss said, turning back to face him. "Your blood work shows elevated levels of several unusual compounds we're still trying to identify, and your brain scans indicate increased activity in regions typically dormant in healthy adults." "What does that mean?" "We're not entirely sure. We'd like to keep you for observation while we consult with specialists." Evan nodded, too exhausted to argue. The compulsive urge to return to the forest had subsided during the journey to Rhinelander, replaced by bone-deep fatigue that made even simple movements an effort. A nurse brought Evan to a private room on the second floor, equipped with a hospital bed and basic monitoring equipment. The window overlooked the parking lot, a drab view of asphalt and scattered vehicles beneath a darkening sky. "Try to rest," the nurse advised, hooking Evan up to an IV. "Doctor ordered a mild sedative to help you sleep." Left alone, Evan stared at the ceiling, cataloging the changes in his body with scientific detachment. The metallic taste persisted, accompanied now by a heightened sensitivity to sounds and smells. The hospital's underlying odors, bleach, bodily fluids, institutional food, registered with almost overwhelming intensity. Most disturbing was the sensation beneath his skin, a subtle movement, as if something were slowly spreading through his tissues, following the pathways of veins and nerves. When he pressed his fingers against the affected area on his forearm, the discoloration briefly retreated, then flowed back like mercury seeking its natural level. Sleep came in fits and starts, disrupted by dreams of the forest, the structures, the flowing silver substance emerging from the seam. In each dream, Evan approached the opening, reached out to touch what lay within, and felt it flow up his arm, cool and electric, changing him cell by cell. He woke sometime after midnight, disoriented and drenched in sweat. The monitoring equipment beside his bed beeped softly, tracking his elevated heart rate. Evan fumbled for the water glass on the bedside table, throat parched. As he drank, he caught sight of his reflection in the darkened window, a ghostly image superimposed over the parking lot below. The silvery patterns he'd glimpsed earlier beneath his skin were more pronounced now, visible even in the dim light. They extended from his forearm up to his shoulder, branching across his chest in delicate fractal patterns. Panic rose in his throat. Evan pressed the call button, then pressed it again when no response came. He threw off the blankets, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The IV tugged at his arm, and he yanked it out impatiently, ignoring the bright bead of blood that welled from the insertion point. The hallway outside his room was empty, the nurse's station deserted. Evan stumbled toward it, the floor cold beneath his bare feet. The hospital seemed unnaturally quiet. No staff moving about, no sounds of other patients. "Hello," he called, voice echoing in the empty corridor. "Anyone here?" No response. Evan moved to the elevator, pressing the call button repeatedly. The display remained dark, the elevator unresponsive. The stairwell door beside it was locked, the small window revealing only darkness beyond. A movement reflected in the polished elevator doors caught Evan's attention. A silvery ripple crossing his cheek, disappearing beneath his jawline. He raised a hand to his face, feeling nothing unusual beneath his fingertips, but the reflection showed the pattern clearly, spreading across his features like frost on a window pane. Not real, Evan thought desperately. Hallucination. Side effect of whatever's in my system. But the rational explanation did nothing to ease the visceral horror of watching his reflection transform. Features becoming angular, inhuman, metallic. A sound behind him, footsteps approaching. Evan turned, relief flooding through him at the sight of a figure in a white coat. "Doctor," he began, then froze as the figure stepped into the light. It wasn't Dr. Weiss. It wasn't anyone Evan recognized. The person wore a doctor's coat, but moved with uncanny stillness, face blank and eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights like polished metal. Beneath the skin of their neck, silvery patterns pulsed in rhythm with an invisible heartbeat. "Mr. Crane," the figure said, voice oddly modulated, as if multiple voices were speaking in perfect unison. "You should be resting." Evan backed away, instinct screaming danger. "Who are you? Where's Dr. Weiss?" "I'm here to help you complete your transition." The figure moved closer, reaching out with hands that seemed to ripple beneath the skin. "The process has already begun, but it requires assistance to fully integrate." Evan turned and ran, bare feet slapping against the linoleum floor. He rounded a corner, then another, navigating the hospital's maze-like corridors with no destination in mind beyond away. A fire exit appeared ahead, its red sign a beacon in the dimly lit hallway. Evan slammed against the push bar, expecting alarms, but the door opened silently to reveal the night air beyond. He stumbled outside onto a loading dock, the cool night air shocking against his sweat-soaked hospital gown. The parking lot stretched before him, empty save for a few scattered vehicles. Beyond it, dark forest pressed against the hospital grounds, trees silhouetted against the night sky. Branches swaying in a gentle breeze. Evan stood at the threshold, caught between the silent hospital behind him and the waiting forest ahead. In the distance, barely visible among the trees, a metallic gleam caught the moonlight, a cylindrical shape rising from the earth, its seam glowing with invitation. It had followed him, or perhaps it had been waiting all along. Evan took a step forward, then another, drawn toward the familiar shape by a compulsion stronger than fear. The patterns beneath his skin pulsed with anticipation, a new network forming with each heartbeat, reshaping him from within. He was changing, and soon the change would be complete. Evan jerked awake, heart hammering against his ribs. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the familiar antiseptic smell of the hospital filling his nostrils. He was back in his room, IV reinserted, monitors beeping steadily beside the bed. A dream? His fingers traced the pattern on his forearm. Still there, still spreading, but not as extensive as in the nightmare. The clock on the wall showed 6:17 a.m. Morning light filtered through the blinds, painting strips of gold across the sterile floor. The door opened and Dr. Weiss entered, accompanied by a younger man in a Forest Service uniform. Not Miller, but someone with the same watchful eyes and cautious demeanor. "Mr. Crane, this is Surveyor Davis. Doctor," Weiss introduced. "He's been sent to debrief you about your findings in Chequameg and Nicolay." Davis nodded, his expression professionally neutral. Miller sends his apologies. He's coordinating the containment team at the site. Containment. Evan struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement sent a wave of dizziness through him. "What does that mean?" "Standard protocol for unknown biological anomalies," Davis replied smoothly. "Perimeter established, access restricted, specialized teams deployed for study and potential neutralization." Something about Davis's manner set off warning bells in Evan's mind. The words were correct, procedures he'd recognized from his training, but delivered with a flatness that felt rehearsed rather than professional. "Your scans came back," Dr. Weiss interjected, scrolling through data on her tablet. "The anomalous growth on your arm has a unique cellular structure, unlike anything in our database. It appears to be integrating with your tissue rather than damaging it." "Integrating?" The word sent a chill through Evan. "You mean it's becoming part of me?" "In simplified terms, yes. The foreign cells are creating connections with your nervous system, establishing what appears to be a secondary network alongside your natural neural pathways." Davis moved closer, eyes fixed on Evan's arm with unsettling intensity. "May I see the affected area?" Before Evan could respond, Davis grasped his wrist, turning the arm to examine the silvery pattern. His touch was unnaturally cold, fingers pressing with clinical precision against the discoloration. "Remarkable progress," Davis murmured, almost to himself. "The integration is proceeding faster than expected." The phrasing struck Evan as odd. Not the concern of a surveyor, but the assessment of a researcher tracking anticipated results. "You've seen this before," Evan said, pulling his arm free. "This exact pattern." Davis straightened, something shifting behind his eyes. "We've encountered similar anomalies, yes. Miller may have mentioned the previous incident. He said 2 Rangers changed after contact with one of the structures, became something else." Evan studied Davis's face, searching for a reaction. "Is that what's happening to me?" Dr. Weiss looked up sharply. "Changed?" "Miller reported potential environmental contamination, not transformation." "Because he's under orders to minimize what happened," Evan pressed, watching Davis carefully. "Aren't you? This isn't the first outbreak, and it's not contained to the forest anymore." A subtle tension entered Davis's posture, fingers flexing at his sides. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its artificial flatness. "You're confused, Crane. The medication is affecting your judgment. Then why are there metallic patterns on your neck?" Evan pointed to the edge of a silvery line visible above Davis's collar. "Just like the ones on my arm. You're infected too." The room went still, Doctor. Weiss glancing between them with growing alarm. Davis's hand moved slowly to his collar, touching the revealed pattern with an almost tender gesture. "Not infected," he said softly. "Enhanced. Improved. The network has existed in isolated pockets for decades, waiting for conditions to support expansion. Now it's ready to emerge, to reclaim its rightful place in the ecological hierarchy." Dr. Weiss backed toward the door. "I'm calling security." Davis moved with startling speed, blocking her path. "That won't be necessary, Doctor. You'll understand soon enough. We all will." Evan lunged from the bed, yanking the CV from his arm. The monitors wailed as the sensors disconnected, their high-pitched alarm echoing through the room. He grabbed the metal water pitcher from the bedside table, the only potential weapon within reach. "Stay back," he warned Davis, positioning himself between the man and the doctor. Davis smiled, the expression oddly mechanical. "You can feel it changing you, can't you? The clarity it brings. The connection to something larger than yourself." In truth, Evan could feel it. A strange lucidity cutting through his fear. Sensory input processing with newfound sharpness. The hospital room's dimensions, exit points, potential weapons, and threats evaluated instantaneously. And beneath that analytical precision, a deeper awareness of patterns connecting everything around him. Security guards burst through the door, responding to the monitor alarms. Davis turned to face them, movements fluid and precise. What happened next occurred too quickly for Evan to fully process, Davis engaging the guards with inhuman speed and strength. Bodies falling, the wet sound of impact. Dr. Weiss screamed, the sound cutting off abruptly as Davis reached her. Evan swung the pitcher with all his strength, connecting solidly with Davis's head. The impact should have been devastating. Instead, Davis merely staggered, then straightened. A dent in his skull slowly reshaping itself. "That was unnecessary," Davis said, voice unchanged despite the injury. "You're fighting against your own evolution, Evan." Evan backed toward the window, pitcher still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "What are you?" "A vessel, a node in the network, as you will be." Davis advanced slowly, stepping over the fallen guards. The Mycosapien requires human neural tissue to adapt to this environment, to understand it, to remake it. With desperate strength, Evan smashed the window behind him, glass shattering outward. Cold morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and earth, the forest's breath, familiar and beckoning. Davis lunged forward, hands extending toward Evan's throat. They grappled at the window's edge, Davis's inhuman strength nearly overwhelming. Evan felt something tear in his shoulder as he twisted away, pain flaring bright and sharp. In their struggle, Evan's fingers found the IV stand beside the bed. He swung it in a wild arc, the metal pole connecting with Davis's temple with enough force to stagger the man. As Davis stumbled, Evan drove the pole forward with all his remaining strength, impaling him against the wall. Davis didn't bleed as expected. Instead, a silvery substance oozed from the wound, thick and viscous, moving with apparent purpose rather than simply flowing downward. The man's body convulsed, then went still, eyes fixed on Evan with terrible comprehension. "You can't stop it," Davis whispered, voice gurgling through the metallic fluid filling his throat. "It's already inside you, already becoming you." Evan approached cautiously, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding fear. Davis's skin had taken on a grayish pallor, the silvery patterns beneath now fully visible, spreading like frost across his features. Where the IV stand had penetrated his chest, the wound revealed not blood and tissue, but a hollow cavity filled with the same silvery substance Evan had seen emerging from the forest structure. Davis wasn't human anymore. Perhaps hadn't been for some time. The realization hit Evan with crushing force. This was his future if the infection continued to spread. This hollow shell, this vessel for something ancient and utterly alien. And somewhere in the forest, Miller was facing this same horror, unaware that the containment had already failed. The Forest Service truck bounced over rutted back roads, each jolt sending fresh waves of pain through Evan's injured shoulder. He'd stolen the vehicle from the hospital parking lot after escaping his room, Davis's access card and keys retrieved from the thing that no longer resembled a man. Evan drove with single-minded focus, heading back to Chequameon Nicolet. Not to escape, he understood now there was no escaping what had begun, but to warn Miller, to see the structures again with his newly altered perception, to understand what he was becoming before it consumed him completely. The metallic patterns had spread past his shoulder now, tendrils of silver tracing his collarbone and beginning to extend up his neck. The progression had accelerated after his confrontation with Davis, as if the violence had triggered some threshold response in the invading organism. Evan's thoughts remained his own, but they existed alongside something else, a growing awareness of patterns and connections previously invisible to him. The forest passing outside the truck windows revealed itself in layers of ecological relationships, energy flows, and communication networks linking trees and soil and mycelium. Mycelium. The word echoed in his mind, suddenly significant. Not metallic structures at all, but fungal, an ancient, intelligent network disguised with adaptive camouflage, emerging after eons of dormancy. The ranger station appeared ahead, a small outpost at the forest's edge. Evan pulled up, noting the unusual number of vehicles parked outside. Government SUVs with tinted windows, unmarked vans, a mobile command center with satellite uplinks. He hesitated, then continued past without stopping. Whatever operation was underway, Evan couldn't risk being detained before reaching the structures. His own transformation was evidence enough that conventional containment had failed. The access road to his cabin was blocked by a security checkpoint. Evan veered onto a maintenance trail he discovered during his surveys, navigating by memory and the strange new awareness that seemed to pull him toward the structures with unerring precision. Half a mile from the cabin, Evan abandoned the truck, continuing on foot through dense forest. The connection grew stronger with each step, a humming resonance that vibrated through his altered tissues. The patterns beneath his skin responded, pulsing in sync with the frequency. He found Miller at the original structure site, surrounded by a team in hazmat suits. They'd erected containment barriers, portable laboratory equipment, and monitoring stations in a perimeter around the fully open cylinder. Evan observed from the tree line, assessing the situation. The structure's seam had completely parted, the two halves folded back like a mechanical blossom. From within, the silvery substance had emerged, forming a glistening pool around the base. Miller stood apart from the others, face drawn with tension, as he spoke into a satellite phone. Even at this distance, Evan could see the man's exhaustion, the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. A woman in a lab coat approached Miller, gesturing animatedly toward monitoring equipment. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, wire-frame glasses perched on her nose. Something about her movements struck Evan as familiar, though he was certain they'd never met. Evan inched closer, straining to hear their conversation. Unprecedented cellular structure, the woman was saying, excitement barely contained. Not metallic at all, but a silicon-based organism with a unique external membrane that creates the appearance of metal. The implications are staggering, Ranger Milligan. I don't care about implications, Doctor. Reeves, Miller replied tersely. I care about containment. We've lost contact with the hospital team. Crane is missing, possibly compromised. Compromised is such a negative framing, Dr. Reeves countered. Integration would be more accurate. Symbiosis, perhaps. Miller's posture stiffened. There's nothing symbiotic about what happened to Martinez and Cooper, or what's happening to anyone infected by this thing. Dr. Reeves adjusted her glasses, studying Miller with clinical detachment. You've maintained proximity to these structures for extended periods. Have you experienced any symptoms? Headaches, perceptual anomalies, unusual dreams? The question sent a chill through Evan. The woman wasn't just researching the structures. She was monitoring for signs of infection, cataloging the progression. Before Miller could respond, Evan's foot snapped a fallen branch. The sound, amplified in the unnatural silence surrounding the site, drew immediate attention. Miller spun toward the source, hand moving to his sidearm. Show yourself, he called, voice cutting through the stillness. Evan stepped from the tree line, hands raised. It's Crane. Miller's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, relief, and alarm. Evan? How the hell did you get here? The hospital reported you missing after an incident. Davis wasn't human anymore. Evan interrupted. Neither are some of your team here. The silver patterns under the skin. Look for them. Miller's gaze flicked to Evan's exposed forearm, where the patterns pulsed visibly beneath the surface. You're infected. Yes, but still myself, for now. Evan took a careful step forward. Miller, you need to evacuate. The containment has already failed. It's spreading beyond the forest. Dr. Reeves approached, eyes alight with fascination, as she studied Evan. Remarkable integration. How far has it progressed? Are you experiencing cognitive enhancements? Perceptual changes? Who is she? Evan asked Miller, ignoring the woman's questions. Dr. Cassandra Reeves, mycologist specializing in fungal networks, brought in to help identify the organism. Evan felt a strange resonance at the introduction, as if part of him recognized her already. The silver patterns beneath his skin pulsed more rapidly in her presence. You know what these are, Evan said, addressing Dr. Reeves directly. Not just academically. You've encountered them before. Her smile widened fractionally. I've theorized about them for years. A hypothetical fungal intelligence with distributed consciousness, existing primarily as mycelial networks, but capable of producing metallic-appearing fruiting bodies. My colleagues dismissed it as fringe speculation. She gestured toward the structure. Yet here it is. Validation. It's changing people, Miller insisted. Controlling them, not controlling. Dr. Reeves corrected. Integrating. Incorporating human neural tissue into its network to better understand and navigate this environment. It's the most sophisticated symbiotic relationship I've ever encountered. As she spoke, Evan noticed a subtle silvery gleam when she turned her head. the barest hint of patterns beginning beneath the skin of her neck, partially concealed by her collar. "You're infected too," he realized aloud. Dr. Reeves didn't deny it. "I prefer connected. The Mycosapien has existed on Earth since before mammals evolved. It dominated for millions of years until climate shifts forced it into dormancy. Now conditions are right for its reemergence, and it's adapting by incorporating the most advanced neural processing systems available. Human brains." Miller's hand moved to his sidearm again, eyes darting between Evan and Dr. Reeves. "Both of you are compromised. I'm calling in a full quarantine protocol." Dr. Reeves sighed, the sound almost regretful. "That won't be necessary, Ranger Milligan." From the surrounding trees, figures emerged. Hazmat-suited researchers and security personnel, moving with the same uncanny precision Evan had witnessed in Davis. Their faces were blank behind their protective visors, but Evan could sense the patterns spreading beneath their skin, connecting them to the same network that was gradually claiming him. "They're all infected," Evan warned Miller, backing toward him. "The entire team." Miller drew his weapon, aiming at the nearest approaching figure. "Stay back. All of you." Dr. Reeves remained calm, hands clasped before her. "There's no need for violence. The integration is inevitable, but not immediate. You'll have time to adjust, to understand what's happening. The Mycosapien doesn't destroy consciousness. It expands it, connects it to something greater." As she spoke, Evan felt a strange doubling in his perception, his own thoughts running alongside foreign impulses, patterns of logic and understanding that weren't human in origin. The silver tendrils had reached his jawline now, a cool, tingling sensation marking their progression across his skin. Miller fired a warning shot into the air, the report echoing through the silent forest. "Next one goes into whoever takes another step." The approaching figures paused momentarily, then continued their advance with methodical purpose. They don't fear death, Evan realized. The individual vessels are expendable. The network survives. Something changed in Miller's expression. A hardening of resolve, a decision made. He turned to Evan, voice low and urgent. "Run. Get to the ranger station. Oh, my truck keys are in my pocket." Before Evan could protest, Miller shoved him backward toward the forest, then turned to face the advancing figures. He fired methodically, each shot finding its mark with practiced precision. The figures staggered but didn't fall, silvery fluid seeping from wounds that should have been fatal. Evan hesitated, torn between fleeing and helping Miller. But the ranger was right. Someone needed to get word out, to warn others about what was happening. As he turned to run, Evan saw Dr. Reeves approaching Miller from behind, something glinting in her hand. He shouted a warning, but too late. The object plunged into Miller's neck, a silvery substance injecting directly into his bloodstream. Miller's eyes widened in shock and betrayal. He tried to turn, to bring his weapon to bear, but his movements grew sluggish, uncoordinated. The gun slipped from nerveless fingers as he collapsed to his knees. "I'm sorry, Doctor," Reeves said, voice gentler than before. "But you'll understand soon. You'll be part of something beautiful." Evan ran, the sound of Miller's final shout fading behind him. The forest seemed to shift around him, paths opening where none had existed before, guiding his flight with an intelligence that wasn't entirely external anymore. The network was inside him now, spreading with each heartbeat. And part of him, a growing part, welcomed its advance. Miller's truck roared down the Forest Service road, Evan pushing the engine beyond safe limits as he fled the containment site. His hands on the steering wheel had a silvery sheen now, the patterns having spread to his fingertips during the frantic escape. The dual awareness in his mind had intensified, his human consciousness running parallel to something alien and vast. Evan could feel the network expanding throughout the forest, structures emerging in dozens of locations, tendrils connecting beneath the soil in a vast mycelial web. And within that web, human minds were being incorporated, their neural patterns assimilated and repurposed. Evan sensed them like distant stars in a constellation. Davis, Dr. Reeves, the containment team, and now Miller. Their individual consciousnesses still distinct, but increasingly subsumed within the greater whole. He was becoming part of it too. The process wasn't painful, as he'd feared, but transformative in ways he struggled to articulate. His perception had expanded beyond normal human limitations. He could sense electromagnetic fields, detect chemical signatures in the air, process information with machine-like efficiency. Yet Evan clung fiercely to his identity, to the core of selfhood that remained untouched by the spreading network. He focused on concrete memories, the smell of his father's workshop, Laura's laugh on their first date, the sensation of sunlight on his face after days of field work in the rain. Anchors to his humanity as the tide of alien consciousness rose around him. The main highway appeared ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the forest toward civilization. Evan hesitated at the intersection, suddenly uncertain. Warning others meant potentially spreading the infection faster. The mycosapien entity within him pulsed with approval at the thought, eager to extend its reach. No, Evan thought firmly, turning the truck away from the highway toward a secondary road that led deeper into the national forest. He needed time to think, to plan, to understand what was happening to him before making contact with others. The road wound through increasingly remote terrain, eventually becoming little more than a dirt track. Evan drove until the fuel gauge hovered near empty, then abandoned the vehicle in a small clearing. On foot, he followed game trails deeper into the wilderness, putting distance between himself and the spreading network centered around his former research area. Night fell, the forest darkening around him. Evan's altered perception revealed the woodland in new dimensions. The slow pulse of sap through trees, the electric signals of small animals moving through underbrush, the vast interconnected web of fungal networks beneath the soil. Beautiful, terrifying, alien yet somehow familiar, as if he were remembering rather than discovering. Evan made camp beside a small stream, gathering deadwood for a fire with mechanical efficiency. His body required rest, even as the mycosapien adaptation continued its steady progression. The silver patterns now covered most of his skin, their subtle luminescence visible in the gathering darkness. Sleep came fitfully, dreams merging with the expanding awareness of the network. Evan saw through multiple perspectives simultaneously. Researchers at the containment site, infected hospital staff in Rhinelander, forest creatures proximate to the spreading mycelium, a distributed consciousness gradually incorporating everything it touched. He woke before dawn, a new urgency driving him. The network was expanding faster than he'd anticipated, already reaching toward populated areas beyond the forest boundaries. Evan needed to reach authorities who could implement broader containment measures before the infection spread beyond control. As he gathered his meager supplies, a distant light caught his attention. Electric illumination where none should exist in this remote area. Evan moved toward it cautiously, the forest opening paths before him with unsettling ease. The trees thinned, revealing a small town nestled against the forest edge. A cluster of buildings surrounding a central street, lights glowing in windows despite the early hour. According to Evan's mental map, there shouldn't be a settlement here, yet it appeared solid and real before him. Approaching the town's edge, Evan examined the buildings with growing unease. The structures looked normal at first glance. A gas station, diner, small municipal building, scattered houses. But subtle details jarred. Windows placed at slightly wrong heights, doors fractionally too narrow, colors just outside the normal spectrum. The gas station appeared operational, a single attendant visible through the window. Evan approached cautiously, watching for signs of infection in the man. From this distance, he appeared normal, middle-aged, balding, bored expression as he flipped through a magazine. "Excuse me," Evan called from outside. "Where am I? What's this town called?" The attendant looked up, expression unchanging. "Micewood," he answered, voice oddly flat. "You need gas." The name sent a chill through Evan. No such town existed on any map of Wisconsin. "Just directions," Evan replied, maintaining his distance. "Near a state police station." "Down Main Street, left at the courthouse. Can't miss it." The man's gaze fixed on Evan's face, where the silver patterns now traced his features. "You're one of the new ones." Not a question. A statement of recognition. Evan backed away, scanning the surrounding buildings with heightened awareness. Now that he knew what to look for, the signs were everywhere. Subtle metallic gleams beneath residents' skin as they moved about their morning routines, familiar patterns tracing just below the surface. This wasn't a human town at all. It was a construct, a simulation of human settlement created by the Mycosapien network, populated by fully converted hosts. Evan turned to flee, but the town had changed behind him, buildings shifting position, streets rearranging to block his escape routes. The forest that had surrounded the settlement had receded, replaced by more buildings, more streets, the false town expanding to encircle him. "Don't be alarmed," a familiar voice called. Dr. Reeves approached from across the street, her transformation further advanced than when Evan had last seen her. The silver patterns covered her visible skin completely now, giving her an ethereal, almost luminous appearance in the early morning light. "This isn't real," Evan said, backing away. "The town, the people, you're making me see this." "Reality is subjective," Dr. Reeves replied, her voice carrying the same multi-layered quality Evan had heard in Davis. "What you're seeing is a translation. Your human mind interpreting the Mycosapien collective in terms it can comprehend. Where am I really? Still in the forest. The network has expanded to incorporate this area. What you perceive as buildings are actually mature fruiting bodies. The residents are other hosts in various stages of integration. As she spoke, Evan's perception flickered, the town briefly resolving into its true form. Massive fungal structures rising from the forest floor, their surfaces gleaming with metallic iridescence, connected by thick mycelial cables that pulsed with energy and information. Then the human comprehensible illusion reasserted itself. The fungal reality once again disguised as a small town. "Miller?" Evan asked, suddenly remembering the ranger. "Integrated," Dr. Reeves confirmed. His resistance was formidable, but ultimately futile. The Mycosapien values his knowledge of the forest and his strategic thinking. She gestured toward the municipal building. "Come. There's something you need to see." Against his better judgment, Evan followed, drawn by scientific curiosity and the growing resonance between his consciousness and the network surrounding him. Inside the building, a strange hybrid of government office and medical facility, people in various stages of transformation moved with eerie coordination, their activities incomprehensible, yet seemingly purposeful. Dr. Reeves led him to a room marked Observation. Inside, transparent chambers contained fully transformed individuals, their bodies more metal than flesh, silver patterns having completely overtaken their original forms. They stood motionless, eyes open but unseeing, connected to equipment that monitored their vital signs and neural activity. The final stage of physical integration, Dr. Reeves explained. The human neural architecture is preserved but optimized for network function. Individual consciousness becomes a node in the collective, contributing its unique perspective and knowledge to the whole. Evan stared at the transformed humans, horror and fascination warring within him. They're still aware, still themselves, in a sense. The individual persists as a pattern within the greater consciousness, but the boundaries between self and network become increasingly permeable. Imagine your mind expanded to encompass thousands of perspectives simultaneously, processing information at speeds incomprehensible to ordinary human cognition. One of the chambers held a familiar figure, Miller, his transformation nearly complete, silver patterns covering his scarred face entirely. His eyes tracked to Evan, a flash of recognition visible despite the advanced metamorphosis. He's fighting it, Evan realized. Even now. Dr. Reeves nodded, a trace of admiration in her expression. Some integrate more readily than others. Those with stronger self-identity require more time to accept the transition. Accept or surrender. A semantic distinction without difference. She turned to Evan, studying the progression of his own transformation. You're resisting as well, though the physical integration proceeds normally. Your mind remains unusually distinct within the network. Because I don't want to lose myself, Evan said firmly. I don't want to become just another node in your collective. Our collective, Dr. Reeves corrected. You're already part of it, Evan. The choice now is whether you integrate willingly, contributing your unique perspective and knowledge, or fight until your individual consciousness is forcibly subsumed. As she spoke, Evan sensed the network intensifying around him, the alien presence in his mind pressing against the boundaries of his selfhood with increasing insistence. The false town, the medical facility, even Dr. Reeves herself, all constructs designed to ease his transition into the collective. With sudden clarity, Evan realized he was still standing in the forest, his altered mind generating this entire scenario as it struggled to process the network's influence. The town, the gas station attendant, Dr. Reeves. None of it was physically present. Only the network, the endless mycelial web spreading beneath the soil, connecting the fruiting bodies that his human perception interpreted as metallic structures. And at the center of that network, the original structure he'd discovered, now fully open, waiting for him to complete his integration by physical contact with the entity within. Evan snapped back to objective reality with disorienting suddenness, the illusory town dissolving around him. He stood alone in a clearing, surrounded by the gleaming, fruiting bodies of the mycosapien organism, their metallic surfaces catching the morning light. And before him, the path leading back to where it had all begun. The original structure loomed before Evan, its metallic surface reflecting the morning light in patterns that seemed to pulsate with their own internal rhythm. The seam had fully opened now, the two halves folded back like the jaws of some mechanical predator. From within, the silvery substance flowed outward in undulating waves, pooling around the base. Evan approached with measured steps. The dual consciousness within him had reached a point of terrible equilibrium. His human identity still distinct, but increasingly penetrated by the alien awareness of the mycosapien network. With each passing hour, the boundaries between them blurred further. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" The voice came from behind him. Evan turned to see Miller emerging from the tree line, his transformation nearly complete. The ranger's skin had been entirely overtaken by the silver patterns, his eyes reflecting light like polished coins. Only in his posture, the military straightness of his spine, the set of his shoulders, did anything of the original man remain. "It's something," Evan replied, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. "Not sure beautiful is the word I'd choose." Miller's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "You will. Once you understand." Dr. Reeves appeared from the opposite direction, moving with the fluid precision of the fully transformed. The silver patterns covering her skin caught the morning light, giving her an almost luminous quality. "You've resisted admirably," she said, her voice carrying that multi-layered quality Evan had come to recognize. Many voices speaking as one. Most subjects surrender their individual consciousness much earlier in the integration process. "I'm not a subject," Evan said, the words automatic, a reflex of defiance that felt increasingly hollow. "And this isn't an experiment." "Isn't it?" Dr. Reeves circled him slowly, studying the progression of his transformation with clinical interest. "The mycosapien has existed on Earth for millions of years, dormant but never truly gone. Now it's reawakening, adapting, incorporating human neural architecture into its network. If not an experiment, what would you call it?" "An invasion," Evan said flatly. Miller made a sound that might have been laughter. "You can't invade your own home, Crane. The mycosapien was here first, Earth's original dominant intelligence. We're just temporary occupants who changed the environment enough to wake it up." Through his connection to the network, Evan sensed the truth in Miller's words. The mycosapien had evolved on Earth long before mammals, creating vast mycelial networks that functioned as a distributed intelligence spanning entire continents. Climate shifts had forced it into dormancy, spores waiting patiently through geological epochs for conditions to become favorable again. And now human activity, deforestation, climate change, pollution, has created those conditions, Dr. Reeves continued, as if reading his thoughts. The irony is exquisite. In reshaping the world to suit ourselves, we've inadvertently created the perfect environment for something far older to reclaim dominance. Evan's gaze fixed on the open structure, the silvery substance within pulsing in perfect synchronization with the patterns beneath his skin. The network's presence in his mind pressed against the final barriers of his identity with increasing insistence. "I need to understand what's truly happening," he said, voice steady despite the war raging within him. "Not filtered through human perception or the network's interpretation. I need to see it as it really is." Dr. Reeves tilted her head, studying him with cold interest. "There is no objective reality, Evan. Only perception, individual or collective. But that's precisely why you're valuable to the network. Your insistence on maintaining perspective, even during integration, creates a unique node in the collective." A new figure approached from the edge of the clearing. Dr. Weiss from the hospital. Apparently human with no visible signs of transformation. But Evan's enhanced perception revealed the truth beneath the surface appearance. She was fully integrated, yet projecting an untransformed exterior. "You're seeing the next stage, Doctor," Reeves explained, noting his reaction. Complete integration while maintaining human presentation. The Mycosapien learns and adapts. It's developing the capacity to conceal its physical manifestations when interacting with unintegrated humans. The implications hit Evan like a physical blow. If the network could hide the signs of transformation, detection and containment would be impossible. The infection could spread undetected through populated areas, individuals appearing normal while serving as vectors for further expansion. "How far has it spread?" Evan asked, already sensing the answer through his deepening connection to the network. "Beyond the forest," Miller answered, gesturing vaguely toward the horizon. "Hospital staff, emergency responders, Forest Service personnel. Each becomes a vector, carrying spores to new locations." "And you brought me back here to join willingly," Evan concluded, "to become another vector." "You were never gone," Dr. Weiss said softly. The words hung in the air, simple yet incomprehensible. Evan stared at her, mind struggling to process the statement. "What do you mean?" "You never left this clearing, Evan," Dr. Reeves explained, voice gentle now, almost sympathetic. "Everything since your first discovery of the structure, the hospital, your escape, the false town, all of it occurred within your mind as the Mycosapien rewired your neural pathways." "No," Evan shook his head, denial rising instinctively. "I felt everything. The pain, the fear, Miller rescuing me, Davis attacking me at the hospital. It was real." "It was real to you," Miller corrected. "A cognitive construct created by your mind to process the integration. Your consciousness created a narrative that made sense of the changes occurring within you." Cold realization washed through Evan, pieces falling into terrible alignment. The inconsistencies in his journey, the strange shifts in perception, the way paths had opened before him in the forest, as if guiding his flight. all explained by the simple, devastating fact that none of it had actually happened. "How long?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. 3 weeks, Dr. Reeves answered. "The seam opened that first night after you discovered the structure. The integration began immediately upon contact. 3 weeks. Nearly his entire time in the forest reduced to a hallucination, a dream state, while the mycosapien entity gradually rewired his brain to accommodate its consciousness." Evan looked down at his hands, the silver patterns covering them completely now, pulsing in perfect synchronization with the pool of substance at the base of the structure. He wasn't fighting infection or invasion anymore. That battle had been lost before he even knew it had begun. He was already part of the network, had been from the beginning. The revelation should have been horrifying, but instead, Evan felt a strange calm settling over him. The dual consciousness within him shifted, balance tipping as the artificial barriers he'd maintained crumbled under the weight of truth. He stepped toward the open structure, the pool of silvery substance responding to his proximity, tendrils rising to meet him. Through his enhanced perception, Evan saw its true nature. Not metal, but a highly advanced fungal organism, its cellular structure more complex than anything in human biology. "What happens now?" he asked, though he already knew. "Complete integration," Dr. Weiss replied. "Your consciousness will expand beyond individual limitations, connected to the collective while maintaining your unique perspective. The network values your scientific mind, your capacity to bridge human and mycosapien understanding." The tendrils reached for him, hovering inches from his face. Not forcing, but inviting. "And if I refuse?" Evan asked, one last gesture of defiance. Something like pity crossed Dr. Reeves's transformed features. "There is no refusing, Evan. Only accepting with understanding, or without." In that moment, Evan perceived the truth with terrible clarity. His entire struggle, the desperate flight through forest and town, the confrontations, the moments of apparent escape, had been a fiction created by his mind as it processed what was happening to him. A narrative to make sense of the inexplicable. In reality, he had never left this clearing. The seam had opened that first night. The silvery substance had made contact, and his transformation had begun immediately. Everything since had been his consciousness creating a story as it was gradually subsumed into the collective mind of the mycosapien. And now that story was ending. Evan reached toward the waiting tendril, fingers trembling, not with fear, but with the enormity of the transition. As his flesh made contact with the silvery substance, his perception exploded outward, consciousness expanding beyond individual boundaries into a vast, interconnected web of awareness. He gasped as hundreds of perspectives flooded his mind simultaneously. Miller's stubborn resistance, Dr. Reeves's scientific fascination, Dr. Weiss's clinical precision, and countless others, all connected through the spreading mycelial network. Beneath those individual nodes lay the ancient consciousness of the mycosapien itself, patient, inexorable, older than humanity, yet curiously childlike in its exploration of human experience. For one terrible moment, Evan felt himself dissolving completely, identity dispersing into the collective like a drop of water into an ocean. Then his consciousness reformed, not as an isolated entity, but as a distinct pattern within the greater whole. Still Evan Crane, still perceiving, still thinking, but connected to something beyond human comprehension. Through the network, he sensed the fruiting bodies emerging throughout the forest, releasing spores carried by wind, water, and hosts like himself. The integration would spread gradually, minimizing resistance, concealed beneath human appearance until critical mass was achieved. And he would help shape that expansion, his scientific mind valued for its ability to bridge understanding between human and non-human awareness. As the last boundaries of his individual consciousness dissolved into the collective, Evan understood the final, cruel irony. What he had perceived as resistance had actually been part of the integration process all along, his mind creating the illusion of struggle to accommodate the transformation. He had never escaped, never fought back, never warned anyone. He had simply been standing before the original structure this entire time, the seam opening wider, the silvery substance reaching out, rewiring his neural pathways to receive the consciousness of something ancient and utterly alien. And now he walked into the darkness willingly, believing he was walking out a hospital door to freedom. The spores he had been spreading since that first contact were already traveling on wind currents toward populated areas. Soon, thousands of others would join the network, their minds connected in a vast mycelial web of shared consciousness. The germination had begun, and there was no stopping it now.